The snow fell gently across the Montana mountains as the stagecoach rumbled to a stop outside a rustic log cabin, its windows glowing warmly against the winter dusk. Elizabeth Whitman gathered her blue wedding dress around her and clutched her worn leather suitcase, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and hope. At 26, she had traveled from Boston to marry a rancher she had never met, their courtship conducted entirely through carefully written letters. "This is the Henderson Ranch, miss," the driver called down. "Safe travels to you." Elizabeth stepped down into the snow, her white veil catching the wind as she looked around for signs of her intended husband. According to their correspondence, Thomas Henderson should be waiting to greet her, but the ranch yard appeared empty except for the distant sound of cattle and the smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. As Elizabeth approached the cabin door, it swung open to reveal a man in his 30s wearing a cowboy hat and leather vest. His weathered face showed surprise and confusion as he took in her wedding attire and obvious expectation. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion," he said, removing his hat politely. "I am Jacob Morrison. This is the Morrison Ranch. The Henderson place is about 5 miles east of here." Elizabeth felt her heart sink as she realized the stagecoach driver had made an error. "Oh dear," she said, her voice barely steady. "I am Elizabeth Whitman. I was supposed to meet my fiancé, Thomas Henderson, today. We are to be married this evening." Jacob studied her face, seeing the disappointment and worry there. "Miss Whitman, I am afraid you have bigger problems than being at the wrong ranch. The Henderson place burned down 3 weeks ago. Thomas left for California shortly after, saying he was done with ranching." The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. She had spent her life savings on the journey west, leaving behind everything familiar for the promise of a new life, with a man who had apparently abandoned both his ranch and their wedding plans, without bothering to inform her. "Papa, who is the pretty lady?" a small voice asked from behind Jacob. Elizabeth looked down to see a little girl of perhaps 6 years old, with dark hair braided neatly and wearing a blue dress that matched the color of her father's eyes. The child looked at Elizabeth with the open curiosity and trust that only children possess. "This is Miss Elizabeth, Sarah," Jacob explained gently. "She was supposed to visit the Henderson Ranch, but there was some confusion with her transportation." Sarah stepped closer to Elizabeth, studying her wedding dress with wonder. "Are you a princess?" she asked with the seriousness that children bring to important questions. Elizabeth smiled despite her circumstances, kneeling down to Sarah's level. "No, sweetheart, I am not a princess. I am just someone who seems to have gotten lost." Sarah reached out and touched the fabric of Elizabeth's veil with gentle fingers. "You look like the angels in my picture book," she said softly. "Papa, can she stay for supper? It is getting dark and the snow is coming down harder." Jacob looked at the gathering storm and made a decision that would change all their lives. "Miss Whitman, you cannot travel in this weather, and there is nowhere else to go tonight. Please stay with us until morning and I will help you figure out what to do next." As the evening progressed, Elizabeth found herself drawn into the warm domesticity of the Morrison household. Sarah chattered constantly, asking questions about Elizabeth's dress, her journey, and whether she knew any stories about princesses. Jacob prepared a simple but hearty dinner, moving around the kitchen with the competence of a man who had been managing alone for some time. "Sarah's mother passed away 2 years ago," Jacob explained quietly as his daughter played with her corn husk doll near the fireplace. "It has been just the 2 of us since then. Sarah does not get much opportunity to talk with other women." Elizabeth watched the little girl, seeing the careful way she had arranged her few possessions and the slightly too large dress that suggested Jacob was doing his best with limited knowledge of children's clothing. "She is a lovely child," Elizabeth said. "You have done a wonderful job raising her." "I try," Jacob replied with the modesty of a man who worked hard but never felt quite adequate to the task. "But I know she misses having a mother's influence." As bedtime approached, Sarah surprised Elizabeth by taking her hand. "Miss Elizabeth, will you help me say my prayers tonight?" Elizabeth found herself kneeling beside the little girl's bed, listening as Sarah whispered her evening prayers with the earnest faith of childhood. "And please, God," Sarah added at the end, her voice so quiet that only Elizabeth could hear. "If you could maybe help Miss Elizabeth not to leave tomorrow, that would be very nice. I think you might have sent her to us for a reason." Elizabeth felt tears prick at her eyes as she tucked Sarah under her quilted blanket. When she returned to the main room, Jacob was standing by the window, looking out at the snow that continued to fall. "I owe you an apology, Miss Whitman," he said without turning around. "I should have known about Henderson's situation and been able to warn you before you made this journey." "How could you have known?" Elizabeth asked. "And please call me Elizabeth." Jacob turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. "Elizabeth, I need to ask you something, and I hope you will not think me presumptuous." She waited for him to continue. "What kind of man abandons his responsibilities without a word of explanation?" Jacob asked. "You traveled across the country to marry someone who could not even be bothered to inform you that he had changed his mind. That tells me that Thomas Henderson never deserved you in the first place." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, processing the truth of his words. "Jacob, what are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that maybe you ended up at the right ranch after all," he said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "I am suggesting that a man would have to be a fool to let someone like you walk away, and I have never considered myself a fool." Elizabeth stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know we have only known each other for a few hours," Jacob continued, "but I have learned more about your character in this evening than most people reveal in months. You showed kindness to a child who is not your own, grace under circumstances that would have broken others, and the courage to travel halfway across the country for the promise of love." He stepped closer to her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Elizabeth, if you would be willing to take a chance on a different kind of life than the one you planned, I would be honored to offer you my name, my home, and my promise to spend every day trying to deserve the gift of your presence in our lives." Elizabeth felt her heart racing as she looked at this man who was offering her not just security, but a genuine partnership and the love of a child who had already claimed a piece of her heart. "Jacob," she said softly, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to give us a chance to build something beautiful together," he replied. "Sarah and I need someone who understands that the best families are not always the ones that start in conventional ways, but the ones that choose each other with open hearts." The next morning, Elizabeth woke to find Sarah sitting beside her bed, still in her nightgown, watching her with hopeful eyes. "Miss Elizabeth," the little girl whispered, "I had a dream last night that you stayed with us forever. Do you think dreams like that ever come true?" Elizabeth pulled Sarah into her arms, feeling the rightness of the moment settle around them like a warm quilt. "Sarah, I think sometimes the best dreams are the ones that come true when we are not even expecting them." That afternoon, as the snow continued to fall softly outside the cabin windows, Elizabeth and Jacob were married by the traveling preacher, who happened to be making his winter rounds. Sarah served as both flower girl and witness, clutching Elizabeth's blue dress and whispering throughout the ceremony that she had known God would send them exactly what they needed. Sometimes the most important journeys are not the ones that take us where we plan to go, but the ones that take us where we belong.